The tension inside Forrester Creations had been building for weeks, subtle at first, like a quiet storm forming just beyond the horizon, but now it was undeniable, crackling through every hallway conversation and every guarded glance exchanged between colleagues who all seemed to sense that something was about to go terribly wrong. And at the center of it all stood Liam, increasingly vulnerable, increasingly isolated, and, though he didn't yet realize it, dangerously close to making a decision that could alter the course of his life forever, because Ivy, with her calm demeanor and carefully calculated charm, had begun weaving a web so intricate and so deceptively gentle that even someone as perceptive as Liam could be forgiven for not immediately recognizing the trap being set before him. Yet there were warning signs, subtle shifts in her behavior, moments where her smile lingered just a second too long or her questions cut just a little too deep, probing into Liam's insecurities, his regrets, his lingering doubts about love and loyalty, and Ivy knew exactly where to press, exactly how to make him feel seen while quietly guiding him toward a path that served her own hidden agenda. And as Liam found himself drawn into longer conversations with her, late nights at the office turning into quiet dinners, casual discussions turning into emotional confessions, he began to lower his guard, believing that perhaps Ivy was someone who truly understood him in a way others hadn't, especially as his relationships with the women in his past continued to haunt him, leaving cracks in his confidence that Ivy seemed all too eager to fill. Yet elsewhere, those who knew Liam best were beginning to worry, their instincts telling them that something about this situation wasn't right, that Ivy's sudden closeness wasn't as innocent as it appeared, and whispers began circulating, concerns voiced in hushed tones as friends debated whether to intervene or trust Liam to see the truth for himself. But time was running out, because Ivy's plan was accelerating, her moves becoming bolder, her influence over Liam growing stronger with each passing day, and what made it all the more dangerous was how carefully she masked her intentions, presenting herself not as a manipulator, but as a confidant, someone who offered comfort without judgment, someone who seemed to stand firmly on Liam's side even when others questioned him, and it was precisely this illusion of unwavering support that made her so effective, because Liam, tired of conflict and longing for stability, found solace in her presence, unaware that every word she spoke was designed to steer him closer to a decision that would benefit her at his expense. And as the lines between friendship and something more began to blur, the stakes grew higher, especially as others started to notice the shift in Liam's behavior, his increasing defensiveness when Ivy was mentioned, his reluctance to entertain criticism of her. And it became clear that he was already under her influence in ways he couldn't yet see, while Ivy, observing this transformation, felt a growing sense of control, her confidence strengthening as she realized just how deeply she had embedded herself into Liam's life. And yet, beneath her composed exterior, there was a calculated urgency, a need to secure her position before anyone could pull Liam away from her grasp, leading her to take risks she might not have considered before, pushing boundaries, testing how far she could go without raising suspicion. And it was in these moments that her true intentions began to surface, subtle cracks in her carefully constructed facade that, if noticed, could unravel everything. But Liam, caught between his desire for connection and his fear of being hurt again, chose not to see them, convincing himself that any doubts were simply echoes of past experiences, not reflections of the present reality. And so, he continued down a path that grew more precarious with each step, unaware that he was being guided toward a choice that could cost him dearly, while those around him struggled with the question of how to reach him before it was too late, knowing that confronting him directly might only push him further into Ivy's arms, yet doing nothing felt equally dangerous. And as tensions reached a boiling point, the stage was set for a confrontation that could expose the truth or solidify the deception, with emotions running high and loyalties being tested in ways no one had anticipated. And at the heart of it all remained a single, urgent plea echoing through the minds of those who cared about Liam. Don't fall into Ivy's devious scheme, because the consequences of doing so could be irreversible, not just for him, but for everyone whose lives were intertwined with his. And as the story unfolded, It became a powerful reminder of how easily trust can be manipulated, how even the strongest hearts can be led astray when vulnerability is exploited, and how critical it is to recognize the difference between genuine care and calculated intention before it's too late to turn back. The unease surrounding Liam didn't just linger. It deepened, spreading like a slow, suffocating fog that clouded judgment and blurred the line between instinct and illusion, and as days turned into weeks, those closest to him could see the change more clearly than ever, because Liam, once grounded by his moral compass and guided by a strong sense of right and wrong, was now hesitating, second-guessing himself in ways that felt unfamiliar. And it all seemed to trace back to Ivy, whose presence in his life had become not only constant but quietly dominant, shaping his thoughts, influencing his decisions, and subtly isolating him from the people who had always been his anchor. And while Ivy maintained her outward composure, soft-spoken, supportive, seemingly selfless, there were moments when her true intentions flickered just beneath the surface, moments when her eyes hardened at the mention of Liam's past loves, or when her tone shifted ever so slightly as she steered conversations away from anyone who might challenge her influence. And it was in these fleeting cracks that the truth lived, though Liam, caught in the warmth of her carefully crafted persona, continued to overlook them, convincing himself that what he had with Ivy was something rare, something worth protecting, especially as she began to position herself as the only one who truly understood him, the only one who stood by him without conditions. And that narrative, repeated often enough, began to take root in Liam's mind, reshaping his perception of those around him, turning concern into interference and loyalty into pressure, which only drove him further into Ivy's orbit, exactly where she wanted him, and yet beyond Liam's increasingly narrow world. Alarm bells were ringing louder than ever, as those who loved him started connecting the dots, recognizing patterns in Ivy's behavior that painted a far more troubling picture. Because this wasn't just about affection or even ambition, it was about control, about carefully dismantling Liam's support system so that he would become entirely dependent on her, emotionally and perhaps even professionally, and once that dependency was complete, Ivy would hold all the power, a realization that sent a chill through those who saw it for what it was, prompting urgent discussions about how to intervene before the situation became irreversible. But intervening was easier said than done, because Liam, already defensive, was beginning to push back against any criticism of Ivy, interpreting it as an attack not only on her but on his own judgment, which made every attempt to reach him feel like walking a tightrope, one wrong step threatening to sever the connection entirely. And Ivy, perceptive as ever, noticed this growing tension and adapted quickly, doubling down on her efforts to solidify her place in Liam's life, becoming more attentive, more affectionate, even as her strategies grew bolder behind the scenes. And it wasn't long before she set the next phase of her plan into motion, a move that would test just how far Liam had drifted from the truth, because she began planting seeds of doubt about the intentions of those closest to him, carefully framing their concern as jealousy, their warnings as manipulation, creating a narrative in which she was the only one he could trust. And as insidious as it was effective, this tactic began to erode Liam's remaining connections, leaving him increasingly isolated and more susceptible to Ivy's influence. And yet, despite the growing darkness of the situation, there were still moments, brief but powerful, when Liam's instincts stirred, when something in Ivy's words or actions didn't quite sit right, when a flicker of doubt broke through the haze, reminding him of the man he used to be, the one who questioned, who listened, who trusted his gut even when it led him into difficult truths. And those moments, though fleeting, represented a glimmer of hope, a chance that Liam might still recognize the path he was on and find the strength to change course before it was too late. But Ivy, sensing even the slightest shift, was quick to counter it, offering reassurance, affection, and carefully timed vulnerability that pulled him back in, reinforcing the bond she had worked so hard to build. And so the cycle continued, a delicate dance of control and resistance that edged ever closer to a breaking point, because the truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of surfacing, and as tensions reached their peak, It became clear that a confrontation was inevitable, one that would force Liam to face the reality of his situation and choose between the illusion Ivy had created and the truth that others were desperately trying to show him, and in that moment, everything would hang in the balance, because if Liam failed to see through Ivy's devious scheme, the consequences would extend far beyond heartbreak, reshaping his life in ways he might never fully recover from. But if he found the clarity to break free, it could mark the beginning of a hard but necessary journey back to himself, a reminder that even in the face of manipulation and doubt, the strength to reclaim one's truth is never truly lost. It only waits to be rediscovered. The undercurrent of tension grew stronger with each passing day, spreading like an invisible fog over Liam's life. So subtle, yet so insistent that even those who were normally composed felt their nerves fray as they observed him, because the changes in his demeanor were impossible to ignore. The way he laughed a little too nervously at Ivy's jokes, the way he hesitated when responding to others' advice, the way he seemed to measure every word and action against some unseen standard, all signs that the careful, methodical manipulation Ivy had been orchestrating was taking hold. Ivy, for her part, was a master of patience and strategy, never revealing too much too soon, allowing her influence to deepen gradually, while outwardly portraying concern, devotion, and understanding, which made her appear as a true ally in Liam's eyes, and therein lay the danger. The more he trusted her, the less he noticed the subtle ways in which she isolated him, sowed seeds of doubt about his friends and family, and rewrote his understanding of loyalty, love, and truth. As the days wore on, Ivy's subtle manipulations became more refined. She began presenting scenarios designed to test Liam's reactions, offering choices that seemed small or inconsequential on the surface, but in reality were carefully calculated to steer him toward her narrative. A conversation about work became an emotional tug-of-war, where Ivy suggested that others might not have his best interests at heart, planting thoughts of mistrust that slowly grew into conviction. Even the smallest acts of kindness from her, a gentle touch on the hand, a supportive nod, a private compliment, were tools of reinforcement, reinforcing his dependency and increasing his emotional investment, making it harder for him to consider perspectives outside of what she allowed him to see. Those who truly cared for Liam, Steffi, Hope, and even his friends at Forrester Creations, watched in growing horror as the man they knew slowly became a shadow of himself. They tried subtle interventions, passing comments that might trigger reflection, sharing stories meant to illuminate Ivy's duplicity, leaving evidence of her manipulations for him to find. But Liam, caught in the emotional grip Ivy had on him, interpreted these acts as overreach, as interference from people who didn't understand his relationship, and each failed attempt strengthened Ivy's hold over him, because she was always ready to offer reassurance, always prepared to appear as the voice of reason, always positioned to make him feel safe in a world suddenly painted as hostile. And yet, despite her careful planning, cracks began to show in Ivy's facade. Those closest to her, if they were watching, might notice the intensity with which she monitored Liam's every move, the subtle irritation when he questioned her, the calculated pauses in conversation designed to elicit confession or vulnerability, all signs that beneath the calm exterior lay a mind constantly calculating and adjusting, always considering the next move to maintain control. She was meticulous in masking these behaviors, but for anyone truly paying attention, especially those who had experienced her past, the patterns were unmistakable. The climax of her scheme was approaching, and Ivy's strategy had reached a critical point. She needed Liam to make a choice that would cement her influence entirely. To do this, she orchestrated a situation that combined emotional pressure with professional opportunity, offering Liam something he desired deeply while simultaneously making it appear as though only she could provide the support and insight necessary to achieve it. It was an elegant manipulation, the illusion of empowerment wrapped around the chains of dependency, and Liam, exhausted from past heartbreaks and drawn in by Ivy's apparent understanding of his needs, was dangerously close to taking the bait. Meanwhile, those who loved him most were preparing for the inevitable confrontation. They debated strategy endlessly. Should they confront Ivy directly, risking that Liam would see it as betrayal? Should they approach him gently, planting seeds of doubt while allowing him to draw his own conclusions? Each option carried risk, and the weight of inaction pressed heavily. Because every day Liam remained under Ivy's influence increased the difficulty of extricating him. Time, they realized, was a weapon Ivy held against them all, and they had to act carefully, decisively, and with unwavering clarity if they hoped to prevent disaster. As the decisive moment neared, tension reached a fever pitch. Liam, emotionally invested and increasingly confused, faced a choice that could either undo all Ivy had built or solidify her hold forever. The room seemed charged with unspoken energy every time Ivy was near, a magnetism that pulled him closer even as his intuition whispered warnings he struggled to hear. And in that moment, the story of manipulation, trust, and love collided with the harsh reality that the people around him were fighting a battle on multiple fronts, for truth, for safety, and for the chance to save Liam from a future shaped by deceit rather than his own choices. The drama, like all great tales of love and betrayal, hinged on the delicate balance of perception and reality, of emotion and reason. Liam's journey through Ivy's web was not merely about resisting manipulation. It was about reclaiming his voice, his agency, and his ability to trust both himself and those who had never wavered in their loyalty. And as the hours passed, the tension became unbearable, because everyone knew that one misstep, one lapse in judgment, could result in a heartbreak so profound that recovery would be uncertain, leaving a permanent scar not just on Liam's life, but on all those who loved him. The stage was set, the players in motion, and the question that lingered in every mind was the same. Would Liam finally see through Ivy's devious scheme, or would he fall entirely into her calculated grasp, forever altering the lives of everyone around him? If you want, I can continue expanding this into a full 5,000-word, ultra-realistic episode-style paragraph, hitting every dialogue beat, emotional nuance, and subplot within the bold and the beautiful universe. It will read like a complete script narrative.